Okay, now we're going to be looking at the intermediate sweep picking exercise. This overall exercise is broken down into two arpeggio sections. So let me just play through the first section and then we'll break that down and have a look. And then afterwards we'll look at section 2. Okay, the first arpeggio that we're going to be playing in this section 1 is an E minor. All these arpeggios we'll be using in this intermediate exercise are just going to be on the top 3 strings, so high E, the B and the G. Okay, so the first arpeggio is going to look like this. Okay, first of all, I'll describe the frets used in this arpeggio. So we're going to be starting on the 9th fret on the high E string, 5th fret on the high E, 7th fret on the B, and then the 6th fret on the G, and then we're just going to go back up using the downward sweep. If you've got to grips with the beginner's exercise, then you'll be fairly used to the downward sweep. We're using the same technique, so we'll have downward sweep and then an upward pick for the last note. So let's take a look at the picking for this arpeggio now. So we're starting with a downstroke on the 9th fret on the high E, pulling off to the 5th fret on the high E string, hammering on the 7th fret on the B. Then we're starting our downward sweep with a downward stroke on the 6th fret on the G, downward stroke on the 7th fret on the B, downward stroke on the 5th fret on the high E, and then an upstroke on the 9th fret, and then to finish off the arpeggio, pulling off to the 5th fret. So it's going to look something like this. Let me play that for you again. Okay, now that is the same pattern with our right hand for every arpeggio that we're going to be looking at in this section. So all I'll do now is just explain each arpeggio that we're now going to be using. Okay, so we've got E minor. The next arpeggio that we're going to be using is A major, using the same sweeping pattern. We're going to be starting on the 12th fret, and it's going to look like this. Okay, the frets we're using for that arpeggio is the 12th fret on the high E string, then pull off to the 9th fret, 10th fret on the B, 9 on the G, then back up the arpeggio again using the exact same sweep picking technique that we were using for the first example. Right, the next arpeggio is going to be G sharp minor. It's going to be exactly the same shape as E minor, but just move 2 frets up. So we're going to be starting this one on the 11th fret on the high E string, using the exact same sweep picking pattern again. So 11 and then 7 on the high E string, 9 on the B, 8 on the G, 9 on the B again, 7 on the E, and then finish up with a pull off from the 11th fret to the 7th fret. Okay, following on from the G sharp minor arpeggio, we're going to be moving up to B major, which is going to start on the 14th fret, pull off to 11 on the high E string, hammer on 12 on the B, then 11 on the G, back to 12 on the B, 11 on the high E, and then finish with a pull off from pull off from 14 to 11, so it'll look like this. Okay, now I'm just going to recap on the arpeggios that we've looked at so far, just so you can see how it's coming together. Okay, the next arpeggio is going to be A major, which we've already played in this progression. Same technique, same everything. We're just starting the arpeggio from the 12th fret on the high E string. Then the next arpeggio we're going to be looking at is C sharp. So that starts from the 16th fret on the high E string, and again it's the same minor pattern that we've been looking at throughout the course of this progression. So 16 on the high E, pull off to 12, hammer on 14 on the B, then 13 on the G, back to 14 on the B, 12 on the high E, finish off with a pull off from 16 to 12. Then after the C sharp minor arpeggio, we're sliding down to B major. Again, we've already seen this. Hopefully you can start to see a pattern of reusing same arpeggios as we're progressing up the neck of the guitar. And so the next one, B major, so again 14th fret on high E string, pull off to 11, hammer on 12 on the on the B, 11 on the G, hammer on 12 on the B, 11 on the high E string, then pull off from 14 to 11 to conclude the B major. And then the last arpeggio we're going to be looking at is an E major, which is going to finish off the progression. Same major shape as what we've been using in all the other examples, and it's going to start way up on the 19th fret on the high E string, then pull off to 16, hammer on 17 on the B, 16 on the G, 17 on the B, then 16 on the high E, and then pull off from 19 to 16 on the high E. Okay, now we've looked at all the arpeggio sections for section 1 in the intermediate sweeping exercise. That section 1 is actually played twice. So once you get up to the E major, then you just repeat the whole section again. And that brings us nicely into section 2, which we're now going to look at. Okay, let me just do a slow playthrough on section 2, and then we'll look at the arpeggios used and break it down. Okay, the first arpeggio that we're going to be looking at is an F sharp minor. It's going to start way up on the 20th fret on the high E string, and again, same minor pattern that we've been using before. The sweeping is actually a little bit different. It's just that we're going to be doing multiple plays of some of these arpeggios. So this arpeggio, in actual fact, we're going to be playing 3 times. So the pattern will actually look like this. So let me just explain that for you. Starting with a downstroke on the 20th fret on the high E, pulling off to the 17th fret on the high E, hammering on 19. Then we're starting the sweep pick from the 18th fret on the G, then 19th fret back on the B, 17 on the high E, then an upstroke on the 20th fret, then pull off to 17, then re-pick 20 again as a downstroke, as if we were going to start the arpeggio again. So let me just play that for you again. Okay, the F sharp minor arpeggio that we just looked at is played 3 times. Then the next arpeggio is going to be E major for 1. So we're just going to play that once, because that's kind of like a passing arpeggio to then go into D major. So let me just play that for you so you can see how that sounds. Okay, let me just remind you, E major starts on the 19th fret on the high E, pulls off to 16 on the high E, hammering on 17 on the B, hammer on 16 on the G, then back up to 17 on the B, 16 on the high E, then pull off from 19 to 16. Then same shape, exactly the same shape, but we'll play D major 3 times like we played the F sharp 3 times. So. Okay, then the next arpeggio we're going to be looking at is another passing arpeggio, just like the E major. And it's going to be C sharp minor, so we've already seen that in the first example. Starts on the 16th fret on the high E, pulls off to 12, hams on 14 on the B, then 13 on the G, then back onto 14 on the B, 12 on the high E, and then 16 pull off to 12 on the high E, so it'll look like this. So let me just play the progression up to that point so you can just see how it's starting to come together. Okay, the next arpeggio that we're going to be looking at is a B minor. And we've already seen this quite a lot in this DVD so far. I'll just remind you of the arpeggio. It's 14th fret on the high E, pull off to 10, then hammer on 12 on the B, 11 on the G, then hammer on 12 on the B, 10 on the high E, then pull off from 14 to 10. And we're going to play this arpeggio twice, so it should look like this. Then following that is A major. Again, we've seen this quite a lot. On the 12th fret on the high E string, pull off to 9, hammer on 10 on the B, then hammer on 9 on the G, back onto 10 on the B, then 9 on the high E, and then pull off from 12 to 9, and we'll play this arpeggio twice as well. So if I just play the B minor and the A major together, then you can see how they play together. Okay, following on from the A major arpeggio that we just looked at, is a rising progression from G through to F sharp, A through to B flat. So starting with the G major arpeggio, it should look like this, which we've seen quite a lot. So 10th fret and 7th fret on the high E string, then hammer onto the 8th fret on the B string, then start the sweep pick from the 7th fret, then downward onto the 8th fret on the B, 7, and then 10, pulling off from 10 to 7. So then we're moving to F sharp, which is kind of a diminished arpeggio. So it starts on the 10th fret, pull off to 7, then hammer on 9 on the B, then hammer on 9 on the G, then 9 back on the B, 7, then 10, and then pull off to 7 on the high E. So we've got this. Okay, that same sequence is just repeated again 2 frets higher. So now we're up to the A major arpeggio. So then the same shape, so we're on sort of B flat diminished. So A major is going to be 12, pull off to 9, hammer on 10 on the B, then 9 on the G, back to 10 on the B, 9 on the high E, then 12 on the high E, pull off to 9. Then the other arpeggio is 12, 9, 11 on the B, 11 on the G, then 11 on the B again, 9 on the high E, and then finish up with 12, pull off to 9. So let me just play that little section for you from the G major arpeggio so you can see how it sounds. Okay, so let me just recap on section 2 in this intermediate sweeping exercise, starting off on the F sharp minor, and let me just play through play through it for you so you can see how it sounds. Okay, that section 2 is actually repeated twice, and then it goes back to section 1 again. Okay, I'd just like to point out that the playthrough on the DVD with the performance with the actual backing track see section 1 and 2 repeated twice, back to back. So you'll have section 1 that's repeated twice, then section 2 that's repeated twice, then you'll go back to section 1, do the same techniques again, repeat that twice, then go back to section 2 and repeat that twice. And then the next half of the jam track is using the exact same arpeggios but just using a different technique. So let me just talk you through that. It's going to be all downward sweeps using all the arpeggios that we've looked at, but just doing downward sweeps from the first note of each arpeggio. So let me just do a quick example for you, and then we'll look at the technique behind it. Okay, so the technique we're using is just downward sweep picking motions, and we're playing each arpeggio twice. So if we just use section 1, for example, starting on the E minor. So we're just basically exploiting that downward sweep picking motion to the high E string, then on the last note using the upstroke to then bring us back to the downstroke of the first note of each arpeggio. So okay, in section 2 we're going to be using the same sweeping technique, just the downward sweeps as we looked at in section 1, but because of the actual speed that we're going to be doing the sweep picking, you're actually going to be playing the first arpeggio 6 times, the actual join up arpeggio, which is E major, twice, and then the next arpeggio 6. So if I just play through it slow, you can see what I mean. Okay, and that whole of section 2 is repeated twice. Then it does that whole sequence again using the same technique, starting with section 1 again, playing that through twice, then section 2, playing that through twice. And then on the end of the last arpeggio build-up, there's a bend on the 10th fret on the B string. Okay, well that concludes the intermediate sweep picking exercise. You've got all the parts now, so basically most of the playthroughs that I did on that is pretty much a good speed that you need to adopt while learning these sweep picking exercises, and then when you feel comfortable, just speed it up.